Wonderful. Hello, everyone. It's so wonderful to see such a packed room here in Brussels, and a big hello to everyone who is joining us online. My name is Dora Meredith, and I am the director of ODI Europe, an independent global affairs think tank with offices in Brussels, London, and DC. And it is a real pleasure to welcome you all to our first edition in 2025 of the Gender Talks, which we are delighted to be hosting with our partners, UN Women, led by Florence and colleagues. And we jointly host an event every quarter here in Brussels to discuss key policy priorities relating to gender equality. Today's event is focused on the EU's foreign policies. So, where are we globally? Well, globally, no country in the world is on track to achieve gender equality. I'm sure it's no surprise to anybody in this room or online. To achieve gender equality by 2030. SDG 5, which is gender equality, is one of the least funded SDGs globally. The global context is marked by growing concerns with deprioritization of gender equality, ODA cuts, and rising anti-gender and democratic backlash. Anti-gender movements, however, are very well funded. And I know that there are experts in this room who have pulled together such great evidence to show that. Major donors like the US, Netherlands, France, Sweden, and Germany are cutting gender equality aid budgets and ODA overall. So it is a bleak picture facing us. Turning to the EU, the end of a dedicated commissioner for equality was questioned by some last year, but there are a number of big opportunities coming up over the next year. Key milestones include the EU Roadmap for Women's Rights, which is expected in March 2025, the successor of the Gender Action Plan, which has now been extended until 2027, and of course the MFF, which is the EU budgets negotiations, which are happening in over the coming months. These opportunities present a real possibility for the EU to be renewing its engagement and adapting to the new challenges that are facing us all. The GAP3 is broadly considered to be an ambitious framework. It's got gender transformative and an intersectional approach. But there remain questions around implementation and impact, which we need to learn from going into the next discussions. So why does this matter? Well, there is a wealth of research that shows us the benefits of gender equality. Empowered women lead to more equitable societies, and gender equality benefits not just the individual women, but their families and their communities. I think I'm speaking to those that completely agree, but we know so much from the evidence that if you invest in gender equality, if you put in the policies in place, you get the outcomes that we all know that we're trying to achieve, whether it's economic or political or trying to address conflicts. So why are we here today? What do we hope to achieve? All of that said, we're here today to really draw together this group to have a discussion around the current state of play for the EU in global action and how it can work together with like-minded countries to safeguard the progress that we've made on gender equality. I really hope that we'll have a discussion with the audience, so please do think of questions, and we like this to be a really engaging space. Some photos may be taken during the event, so please do say to my colleague Youssef, who's at the back, if you have any issue with those being posted at all. I'm really looking forward to this discussion. Thank you so much in advance to the speakers, to our excellent partners at UN Women. And now I'd like to hand over to Florence to kick us off. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dora, and welcome to. Do we have gentlemen? A few, okay. To all of you, yes, I see. Not just the usual suspects, which is good news, because I think I don't need to make the case, like you said. Gender equality is everybody's business and is good for everybody. But I think we're particularly pleased today to welcome a rich panel, but also a rich audience. We will have the opportunity to hear from different colleagues and departments of the European Union, but also interactions with the room. And I think it's timely. I mean, this event, I think on purpose, had us postpone it a few times just for practical reasons. And I think actually it was probably better. Apologies for those who have gone with us throughout those changes, because we all we know now that at the term, in terms of policies, decisions, directions, the EU or the different institutions are taking, things are also clearer, not necessarily that crystal clear yet. And this is why I want to introduce our first speaker, or keynote speaker, that will talk to us, I mean, about the EU's policy framework to promote gender equality in external action, since that's the topic of today. But of course, external, internal are quite linked. And we have a set of milestones coming up, but which link to the different departments, such as the evaluation of the GAP 3. We have another set of gender equality strategies. We mentioned the roadmap, which is more internal, but there is definitely also, with the new commissioner's portfolio for gender and crisis preparedness and management, opportunities, but there's also challenges, not just linked to the external geopolitical context, but also, let's just be honest and blunt, because when we talk anti-gender and backlash, it happens everywhere in every institution. So Julia, you will kick us off. I'm pleased to welcome and to introduce Julia Koch de Violet, which is the head of the European External Action Service Task Force for Gender and Diversity. Julia's got a track record of working for the institution and for the EU, including in Lebanon, if I'm correct, and on gender equality. And she's a close ally, I would say, and a strong champion. So we look forward. I think we'll start with 10 minutes, and then I will invite the other panelists. Do you want to stand here? Okay, perfect.
Good afternoon, dear friends, dear colleagues, fellow advocates for gender equality. As you all well know, we are standing at the beginning of a new political mandate. And this, as President von der Leyen put it at the beginning of this week at the Ambassadors' Conference, in an era of hyper-competitive, hyper-transactional geopolitics. EU ambassadors are discussing this week in Brussels what this new reality means for the EU's foreign policy. And part of the High Representative's answer to this question was, we need to strengthen our greatest asset as the most predictable, reliable, and credible partner in the world. If we are not there pushing for inclusion and championing democratic values, then who is? I find it alarming to see the void left on these matters in the international arena these days. However, I also believe that this can be the EU's moment. It can be the moment where the EU provides an alternative to the autocratic axis we see forming today. As we mark the 25th anniversary of the UN Security Council resolution on women, peace and security, and the 30th anniversary of the Beijing Platform for Action, I think we are reminded of both the achievements and the challenges ahead. These milestones are a celebration of progress, but in the current context, more a sobering call to action. Our normative playing field is being challenged. And we need to look much beyond this year's anniversary year and really think about how do we want the world to look in 2030, in 2040, and possibly beyond. This alternative picture that the EU can provide is our strength and our attraction globally. So it has to be the moment where the EU takes leadership. Our roadmap is clear. With the Gender Action Plan 3 extended to 2027, we have already made significant strides, and I would like to thank all our partners, many of you in this room, for the progress in that. Looking forward to the upcoming roadmap for women's rights and the next gender equality strategy, I believe we'll discuss later. They will build on these foundations and set priorities for the years to come. They will address persistent inequalities while tackling the biggest challenges of today's generation, such as climate change, foreign information manipulation and interference, competitive markets, and raising conflicts. This is the time to show that we in the EU are gender-responsive leaders and that we walk the talk. We need leadership on dealing with gender disinformation. Gender disinformation has become a serious security challenge with profound implications for democracy. Research shows that when autocracies want to attack democracies, they start often with gender equality gains. They use false narratives to silence women and deter them from public life back to the private sphere. State-backed media, troll farms, doctored contents, and others are deployed to discredit women politicians, journalists, activists, and equality-focused legislation, for example, limiting sexual and reproductive health and rights. These campaigns erode trust in institutions, polarize societies, and undermine democratic values. The consequences are severe, not only for those targeted, but also for democracy itself. Women often face trauma or threats that force them out of public life, while disinformation weakens public support for equality-focused policies. To counter this, we need to adopt a gender-sensitive approach, strengthen partnerships to share intelligence, and invest in research to understand evolving tactics and protect communities while upholding democratic values and protect the rights of women we have long fought to gain. We need to show leadership on responsive competitiveness. Gender equality is not just about fairness, it's about economic prosperity. By 2050, improving gender equality could increase the EU's GDP per capita by more than 6%. This would translate to over 1.95 trillion euro over 25 years, brought to us by gender equality. Meanwhile, the gender employment gap costs us 307 billion annually in lost economic output. Money that could be fueling innovation, growth, and opportunity across Europe. These figures highlight the economic necessity of addressing inequality by closing the gender pay gap, by enabling women to get access and control of credits and the job market in general, improving parental leave laws, and balancing out care responsibilities in the households. We need leadership on gender-responsive climate action. Looking at the world in 2050, the effects of climate change, according to the UN statistics from the UN, if not acted upon, may push up to over 150 million more women and girls into poverty globally. Women do play an essential role in mitigating adaptation and environmental protection efforts, but are often excluded from governance processes, even though an estimated 4 out of 5 people displaced by the impacts of climate change are women and girls. Ensuring equal and full representation of women in decision-making in these areas is important, not only for social justice, but also for achieving these sustainable development goals. Moreover, ensuring that climate change conversations have a gender perspective, recognizing the different impact climate has to girls, boys, women, and men, is key to a sustainable and just green transition. Lastly, leadership on women in peace and security. Gender equality is not a standalone issue. It is intrinsically linked to our broader political objectives and global challenges. We know that societies with greater gender equality are more stable and less prone to conflict. Research consistently showed that inclusive peace processes are more likely to result in lasting agreements. If we do continue to disregard these lessons learned, if we continue to discuss about peace and war without women around the table, we are risking even more conflicts, reconstruction becoming more expensive, and societies to fall apart. We need alternative and cooperative solutions. We need countries and societies to become more gender equal. To achieve this, we, the EU, need to keep consistency to our values and interests. Equality and gender equality is part of this consistency. Consistently applying a gender lens, mainstreaming a gender perspective in everything we do, is part of making us the reliable and strong partner we are. It is part of our values that do not change. What will have to change is the way we advance these values. We need to be more agile. We need to engage in negotiations, even with long-term partners we took for granted. And we will have to work with non-traditional partners who do not always share our values, but might share some of our interests. Let me conclude with the High Representative. This is the power of our flag: freedom, dignity, equality, and prosperity. It is the power of attraction. This is our strongest tool. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Julia. Thank you very much for reiterating the high commitment as well of the EU and the leadership. And I think without further ado, we'll hear from other EU institutions, but not only EU. I think first of all, let me introduce, and I'll call each of you to join me here in the front. Kathleen Scheele, who's already with you to some extent and already in the front. Kathleen, welcome. Kathleen's the director of the European Institute for Gender Equality, joining virtually because you're not based in Brussels, but you do come, and we look forward to also, you have colleagues in the room whom I saw, to hear about also the research pieces you have done as an institute which underpin a lot of the decision making. So I'll call to the front then Chiara, Mrs. Chiara Adamo, who's the head of the Human Rights, Gender and Democratic Governance Unit at DG INTPA, International Partnerships. I'll call also to the front, Mr. Noel González Segura, who's the Deputy Chief of the Mission of the Embassy of Mexico to the to the Kingdom of Belgium, Grand-Duché du Luxembourg, and the European Union. Thank you very much, and also I would say a strong ally, not just here, but in Mexico and in Latin America and the Americas globally on feminist foreign policy. I think in the I don't want to single out anybody, but in the current times, I think it's good to, at least as a UN, I have to say, think at multilateralism, think outside the box, and look at, you know, the stars or the bright lights we have on other continents, and not just look at our belly, I would say. And last but not least, Caroline Harper, Director of Gender Equality and Social Inclusion Program at ODI, or trusted partner for also all the research knowledge and expertise, because I think we are saying similar things, and I think it talks to me as well. I think we are a lot of convinced people, but then we all need to go outside to other spaces, I think, to talk about it. But definitely nothing like research, nothing like data as well. So with this, I think I'll join you. It looks a lot more comfortable. Yeah, it's a bit too formal. No, nobody wants to join here. Julia, join us, no? I still have the large one. I think it works. Yes, because then for the interactions and the Q&As. So what we'll do, for those who are not familiar yet with the process, I'll ask each of you one question, and we'll try to keep it to 5 minutes. If really nobody's inspired, or I'll go to a second question, but I think we also want to favor interactions, and I know that in the previous editions we had less time for interactions, so I think I'll try to stick to one question, and then we can have also 2-3 interventions from the floor and an open session of questions. So Kathleen, I'll turn to you. Sorry, I have my back actually to you. Let me do like this. Thanks a lot for joining us. Kathleen, in the next mandate, we expect the EU to prepare a new gender equality strategy and a new gender action plan. A roadmap for women's rights, which we mentioned already, should be announced by Commissioner Labib in March, around the 8th of March celebration, which is International Women's Day. So in your view, what are the most important elements to be prioritized in the EU's policy framework for gender equality moving ahead? And what role will AIG play? I will give you 5 minutes, Kathleen. Thanks.
Thank you, Florence. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Yes, okay. It's good to see you all. And let me first thank UN Women and ODI Europe for the invitation. I know I have 5 minutes. You asked me a really important question, but I will try to stick to the time. And let me start by saying that I think that the previous speaker said something very important, and that is that we need to walk the talk, or in my own words, I would say to practice what we preach. And I think that in that sense, when we look at gender equality, I think the EU is leading by example. In the previous mandate, the European Union has really launched a quite comprehensive package of new legislation, groundbreaking legislation also, and forward-thinking measures for solutions. So let me start by saying this. So it is indeed true that the Commission will launch a new roadmap on women's rights and a new gender equality strategy. And I can tell you what we see as important topics in that sense. And this comes partly from the evidence we are gathering, because for those who do not know my agency, we are the EU Knowledge Center on Gender Equality, and we collect data and information on the state of play of gender equality in the European Union and its member states. So, so that's partly where I get this input from, but also one of the projects we are doing, strategic foresight. So thinking a bit further ahead, as the previous speaker said, looking into 2030, 2040, and maybe even 2050. We also consulted our stakeholders. So what would they think important for the future agenda of gender equality? So let me start from the top. And this is the importance to end violence against women. And this is not just a priority, but it's really a matter of urgency. Florence, you and I spoke at the end of 2024 in a session when we had just launched, together with FRA and Eurostat, the second EU-wide survey on violence against women, and the results were appalling. 1 in 3 women still experience violence in the European Union, in whatever form. So it is very important that we implement the directive on combating violence against women and domestic violence, as well as the Istanbul Convention. So that will be on the top of the list. Another topic that we see as important in the new policy in the next period would be a greater inclusivity in the digital and green transitions. It was already mentioned by the previous speaker, but we need really diverse leadership and gender balanced teams in those areas to drive innovation. So that's the second topic I would like to mention here. And the third one that is really of utmost importance is to address gender disparities in employment and education. If you look at the Gender Equality Index, and I will speak about it a bit later, but this is the area, segregation, both in employment and education, where in the 10 years existence of the Gender Equality Index, we have hardly seen any improvement. So let me now also look at the alignment of EU and global priorities, and of course the Beijing Platform for Action. My agency has looked into the progress at EU level, and we will soon discuss with the member states our Beijing Plus 30 report. And I can tell you how we have basically listed the priorities in that report. So the first one is thriving in a gender equal and inclusive economy. The second area, providing gender responsive social protection and services. The third area, eradicating gender-based violence, stigma and stereotypes. The fourth one being fostering parity democracy, accountability, and gender responsive institutions. The fifth one being shaping a digital transformation that promotes gender equality. Number 6, advancing a socially fair green transition that leaves no women or girl behind. And the last one, achieving peaceful and inclusive societies and advancing gender equality across the world. And this is basically what in our view should also be part of the new policies in the European Union. And for a large part, it would basically be a continuation of the current approaches. A few words about how we support this process. Of course, our continuous task is to provide evidence and data, which we do basically through research. I mentioned already the Gender Equality Index. We update it on a yearly basis, so it reflects the state of play of gender equality in the European Union and the member states. And it mirrors perfectly well what the previous speaker said about the state of play globally. We're not there yet. In the Gender Equality Index 2024, we saw a result of 71 points out of 100 points, where 100 points would basically mean full gender equality. So there's a lot of room for improvement. And again, I'm really also very happy that the new Commission is also going to launch important documents. Maybe a few words about how we will otherwise support.
Very short.
So we also support the implementation of the directives that were launched under the previous mandate. So the Pay Transparency Directive, the Gender Balance on Boards Directive, the Binding Standards for Equality Bodies Directive, the Istanbul Convention. EIGE is supporting the European Commission in collecting the necessary data and information for the Grevio report, and of course the implementation of the Directive on Violence Against Women and Domestic Violence. Well, we have several very diverse tasks in those in that support. I won't go into that in depth because my time is up. But thank you for giving me the floor. And this is basically what I would like to bring in the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kaline. And I would definitely encourage the audience also to visit your website, the different researches that are on it for additional data on the different areas you mentioned and beyond. And we'll move now a bit from within the EU borders to Chiara. Chiara, who's, as I mentioned, working for DG INTPA, so International Partnerships, and looking at, indeed, it's been mentioned, the leadership role of the EU as well, not just with member states, but beyond. We know that INPA has been leading on the Gender Action Plan 3, which, as was mentioned, has been extended. We know an evaluation is coming up towards the end of the year. We also know that the gender equality strategy will be renewed. And on the other end, we also know that indeed, both for the External Action Service or INPA, we hear and we see the priorities and we understand on competitiveness, security as well, and the global gateway, which I hope everybody now understands and knows what it is. So we won't go over that, but we can have another one on that if you. I feel much clearer. But I think I don't want to grill you on that one because that will be foresight as well. I would rather like to ask you what you see, also because the geopolitical context has changed a lot, right? In terms of continuities, lessons, changes. Under you have a new commissioner as well. Don't asking you to disclose anything, but how the trends are going and how the directions will thrive. Thank you.
No, I think it works. Yes. So thanks to you, Florence, and thanks to Audi Europe for inviting me as well. I'm the third EU speaker, so bear with me. I'll try not to repeat what my predecessor said, and actually Julia really set the scene on what do we see and what do we observe in terms of the global context, and the global context is gloomy for gender equality, of course, because of this very complex and evolving geopolitical context, because, as she mentioned, we have experienced now, I think, for a decade, steady autocratization trends, and these are usually accompanied by also backlash on minorities and on women, on gender inequalities. This is also, of course, compounded by increasing conflict and wars, by climate change challenges, migration challenges. All of this really takes a toll on women and girls, but not only. And Florence mentioned what we have been mentioning now for quite some years. SDG 5, not yet there, nobody's there. So if not now, really when do we move? And it feels more and more as a lonely space, I must tell you here. So I'm very glad to share the panel with our friends from Mexico. We really need to look out there and build alliances more than ever to really go back on track. For this, the European Union is going to play its part. And you asked me, and I come to your question now, what is the perspectives, where do we stand, and where are we going, what is going to change? Well, we stand in terms of figures in a good place as European Union. I think it's undeniable. We published last November a report that nobody reads, so I'm going to tell you the key figures in terms of the progress of the increase of actions in promoting gender equality and women empowerment. Has been steady. We have a positive trend observed in 2021, 2022, strengthened even further in 2023 and 2024. As a result, we managed to achieve this mythical 85% of all actions adopted actually between 21 and 23 under our external funding, the NDCI Global Europe, to have gender as a significant or principal objective. And I think that's a good milestone because that was one of the main political commitments that we set for ourselves in the Gender Action Plan in the GAP3, that by 2025 we would get there to at least 85% of all we do to really deliver on gender. And I must tell you, Florence, this is not changing with Global Gateway. It's actually an opportunity that we do integrate gender objectives, gender indicators, and really gender lenses in innovative financing, in big investments. I mean, if I take our cooperation with the European Investment Bank in 2023, we signed agreements for a total volume of 4 billion euros under this window 4 to mobilize many more funds to support business in Africa, Caribbean and Pacific countries until 2027, and more than 55% of all of this is supporting intermediate lending to women-led businesses. So this would not be possible with traditional ODA. So I think we should really start getting into that and really capitalize and use all the tools and financial products that are available beyond granting to walk the talk, as was said on gender equality. We also, particularly in this context, need to be looking not only at the big investments and what can really also be, driving the economies for women in a country, but also to look at what can transform and support, the local actors to transform society, social norms. So the support to women's organizations to CSO is ever more important. Also, the data there is encouraging on our side in the sense that we increase funding to women's rights organizations to 121 million in 23 only, including actually in cooperation with UN Women, because we also have this new ACT program, the White program, also through sub-granting, really reaching to feminist movements, grassroots women movement. But I think that's really the way ahead. We need to do more, also particularly in those countries where we don't do cooperation with authorities, but where we cannot leave civil society on its own. So I have to stop, but I will just tell you where do we go from there. It was mentioned, this commission really reaffirmed that gender equality is going to remain a key priority. We have a commissioner dedicated to equality this term as well, La Habib. But it's an endeavor for the whole college, for the HRBP, and also for my new commissioner, Sikela. In his mission letter, this is the mandate that is given to our political leaders for the 5 years. It's Global Gateway, and then it is keep gender equality really on top of the priorities for the Commission. So we are going to play our part. We have launched the second intermediary evaluation of the Gender Action Plan, GAP3. It will be available. We are in the inception phase. It will be finalized by November this year. We are looking essentially zooming into two things. First, the impact on green and digital transition. And the second is more around the support, not only the funding, but really the support to women's organization and civil society, particularly in conflict settings. So I really do hope that this really can allow us also to inform the future agenda. As you know, GAP3 has been extended to 2027, and this was also done at the request of civil society and other stakeholders to be able to align policy and programming processes, because of course the MFF, so the new financial period, will start in 2028. So this hopefully allows again to be able to have the means to our political ambitions. And in the short term, indeed, we are also taking part in this preparation for a roadmap on women's rights. This is not going to replace the new gender equality strategy, which is coming next year, or the GAP 4, or whatever we will call it in 2027. But it's going to be, I think, setting the road, key principles we want to stand for, I think in a very, very momentous period where we are going to be a few days from CSW, an important one, the 30th anniversary, with the difficult negotiations ahead on the political declaration, and really the need for the EU to stand firm and also in cooperation with all of you and like-minded, and make sure that to the least this process will enable to reaffirm principles and commit, but it's becoming increasingly challenging, isn't it?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chiara. And moving from challenging to a country, at least, and until now is very successful. What are we talking about in the global context? But thank you, Noel González Segura, to share with us the experience of Mexico. And Mexico was the first country in Latin America that formally adopted and stated that it adopted a feminist foreign policy, not just in words, in practice. I think I can attest, and which is why you're here as well today. But of course, it's, let's say, it's inventing by doing as well, right? How do you do it? Especially now, how do you keep it up in a global scenario, which is increasingly made by challenges in global spaces, or even sometimes sub-regional spaces? Some Latin American countries have changed, let's say, from very pro-women's rights to very challenging in recent years. Yet, I think Latin America is still a continent where the feminist principles in external action, and that coming together in several meetings or cumbres or others, it is on the agenda. So I think we'll be pleased to learn from you, to learn for the EU, but also beyond the EU, to have, of course, this dialogue, but also like I like to say, the South-North learning element of it. And I think this will be very useful for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Florence, and thank you very much, Dora, as well, and of course, for ODI and UN Women to invite us here. It actually makes a lot of sense, I think, for Mexico to be here. And if I may add a personal note, for a man to be sitting here, because I am convinced that this is not agenda of only women. It is an agenda of the whole of societies. It is an agenda which is an agenda of fairness, so it is an agenda of inclusion, but it is also an economic agenda. It is a sustainable development agenda. It is an agenda to achieve sustainable, inclusive growth for every member of society. So thank you very much for this amazing invitation that was made to us today. These are challenging times, but these are also times of opportunity. And as we say in Mexico, these are time of women. And I, of course, acknowledge that there are a lot of challenges both in Mexico and in the Latin American region, but allow me to be a little bit positive here, perhaps bring a little bit of a more optimistic view, exactly as you were saying, building on the Mexican experience. As you may know, on October the 1st, last year, so some months ago, Mexico actually elected and took office our first female president, Madame Claudia Sheinbaum Pardo. And she's not only the first president, the first female president in North America, but she's also a very strong leader. She was not there because of a quota. She was there because of her capabilities, because she was actually the best one. And I think that it's also, I think it also has to be acknowledged that Mexico has been working on this issue for a long time. Of course, we have our challenges, but if you remember the first international conference on the rights of women, everybody remembers Beijing in 1995, but the first one was actually in Mexico in 1975, so 50 plus years ago. So these are times where we can also see opportunities. Second day into office, President Sheinbaum introduced a set of legislative proposals to the Mexican Senate for changing 6 articles of the Mexican Constitution and 7 secondary laws in order to establish the substantive equality between women and men, to establish the right to a life free of violence through actions focused on addressing the particular needs of women, and also to close the wage gap between men and women, so equal pay for equal work. The gender perspective is incorporated also in this substantive equality law. And as I don't know if you know, but we also established a constitutional change for establishing the gender parity in the public administration at the federal and sub-federal levels. This means that all cabinets in Mexico, both at the national and state level, Mexico is a federal state, have to have parity, equal number of women and men. I don't know if that is actually more achieved or not in other regions, but I think that is one issue that we have achieved really, which is, I think, notable. And we also, of course, as you mentioned, and I actually think it's very well known, Mexico was one of the first countries, I think the first in the global south, to adopt a feminist foreign policy. We adopted that in the year 2020. And we were the host of the 3rd ministerial meeting of foreign affairs, feminist foreign policy in last July. I think that some of the colleagues that are present in the room were actually in the meeting. And for sake of time, just allow me to remind some of the main findings that we reached in that event. So the first is that at the level of the Mexican public administration, and of course at the level of all ministries, one of the main recommendations was to have fair and equal representation of women in decision-making bodies. So we are achieving, for instance, in Mexico, and that is one of the objectives that was established by the current administration. We want to achieve the same number of ambassadors and representatives of Mexico, heads of offices in all around the world, the appointments to be equal between men and women. We are also trying to mainstream feminist studies or feminist perspective into the curricula of the Mexican Diplomatic School. That is also an important advice. And and that has to do with what was recalled by Chiara and of course by the previous speakers. It is very important that we promote the follow-up to international conferences and conventions that deal with the rights of women, to promote, to defend, to avoid going back into what we have established as the international standards, and that we also promote and support social organizations that are working on that, academic studies, non-governmental organizations that are also working both in the field of academic studies and in the field of advocacy, in order to continue building on the narrative and on the benefits and making understand to all the actors which are relevant how it is important to promote this agenda, as I was saying before, not only for women, but for the society as a whole. And finally, of course, there is this intersectional approach to gender issues, which means that, of course, we all know that on top of one vulnerability, you can have another one, and which makes it worse. So poor people are vulnerable, but if you are a woman which is poor, perhaps you are in a worse place than a male. And the same for all the vulnerability. So those are, I think, the main takeaways. So some of the main recommendations that were achieved in the conference. And I think for the sake of promoting a more inclusive dialogue, I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and so we'll expect you to lead along you as well, of course, at the next CSW, as we all stand to defend Iraqi at different levels, and if not, I think you may get a lineup in front of the embassy to emigrate. But this set, I think, and again as well, it's not by chance, and I think it's also a sign, again, as you said, that within the Foreign Service, within public administration, there needs to be a proactive action or affirmative action, which at the UN is a bit more of our, we've moved the needle, we're part of the challenges as well. But I think we also, at least in different countries, have encouraged always all member states to increase women ambassadors and this time, because otherwise at the UN we cannot meet parity either. So with that said, Caroline, I'll move to you for the next question. As you have conducted extensive research on social norms and cultural change, and specifically global feminist experiences of mobilizing for norm change, in the context then of the rising anti-gender and democratic backlash globally, which we mentioned largely, which puts precisely these norm changes under pressure, and we see resurgence, or they were still there, of violent masculinities and others which underpin, which favor, you know, the actions and justify them vice versa. What are the main challenges and opportunities that you have identified in the feminist foreign policy space, and what can be learned from experiences from other countries, regions? We heard Mexico already, beyond Europe. Thank you.
Thanks very much. That's such a huge question, and there is so much to say, but sort of whittling it down to some key points. So I'm trying to look at lessons from the Global South, really. And it's hard to avoid the fact that in the last 2 weeks, there's been another blistering anti-gender, anti-rights onslaught from a powerful actor. And that can't be ignored. It rightly sparks outrage. You can't take 16 billion out of humanitarian assistance and maybe up to 40 billion out of our system without having a very profound impact as part of backlash on women in Sudan, on the border with Burma, around the world. And we are beginning to feel that in very real terms. But this is also gifting us lessons in how to protect our values and advance our democracies. But to learn that lesson, we have to understand and acknowledge and share our knowledge on the link between feminist actors, secularism, and democracy. This is undeniable, and feminist actors have been at the forefront of pushing for and upholding democratic principles. Indeed, it's one of the reasons that we're under such attack. And what we can learn from other countries beyond Europe is that feminist movements have succeeded in pushing back against misogynistic populism, such as in Brazil under Bolsonaro and in Chile, where they won historic democratic reforms, proving that they're a powerful constituency for democracy. Feminist civil society holds governments accountable to deliver social services, and they often plug the gaps as well, and they help to maintain public trust in the state when ongoing distrust fuels anti-democratic populism. But these linkages are not widely acknowledged, and we need to do a better job in getting that information out there in accessible ways. However, without the coordinated diplomatic support and increased funding, feminist activists cannot be expected to stem the tide of retrogressive change that threatens democracy and gender justice. Feminist movements in the Global South have been navigating perpetual backlash in the form of politicized religion, the defunding of national gender bodies or depriving them of any power in government, the non-implementation of basic commitments. But nevertheless, they have been continuing to work and continuing to make some gains. Two of the most serious recent developments that will increase their risk and which Western countries should also monitor at home is closing civic spaces that limit freedom of speech and collective action, and attacks on our human rights, infrastructure, and multilateralism. And a key learning from the past decade is that norm change in the form of legal and policy reforms can be rolled back once achieved. Of course, the case of girls' education in Afghanistan is one of the extreme examples, closer to home, Roe v. Wade. But it's also important to remember, alongside the extreme examples, that there's a regional impact of norm regression. In other words, the virus is contagious. So the three most important challenges and learnings, not just for feminist movements globally, but remember also for our democracies, is firstly, a chronic decline in funding. Secondly, closing civic space. And thirdly, attempts to demolish the human rights system. However, when these factors are positively in place, actors can respond. For example, just this year, we're doing research in 3 African countries about how feminist actors uphold women's rights. What do they do? What are they actually enacting on the ground? The Gambia recently tried to undo the ban on FGM, but with support from the international community and friendly nations, in this case Egypt, along with local feminist advocacy and allies in government, the ban was maintained after a parliamentary vote. It was a great success after years of work to get the ban in place. So the lesson here is that stakeholder support is transnational. It's built by networks of committed individuals across government departments, international aid agencies, political actors. This is how the gains of the 1990s were achieved, with considerable funding resources flowing transnationally. And this will now need to be secured or resecured if women and marginalized groups are going to resist the current backlash. I don't need to tell you, you've already heard about the funding declines from many European countries, the Netherlands being a case in point more recently, and they have been very active in funding civil society, both within their own country and internationally, and they fund many of the 4 leading global women's funds as well. So we know this is happening, we have to redress it, but it's also about choice. Let's be clear, the funding for feminist movements is not that huge. In 2020, it was less than 1% of official development assistance. And in this era of backlash, recognizing these links to democracy, we can ensure that it's prioritized. And beyond funding feminist movements, of ODA, only 4% is really addressing gender equality. Of course, a lot of other funding goes to women in other ways. So I want to just also bring attention to the challenge of multilateralism. Feminists in the Global South have relied on their national commitments, and I'm speaking of CEDAW, CRC, Beijing and the Platform for Action, and the ICPD to hold their governments accountable and set standards for policy reform. And maybe it's not well known enough in the Global North how important these instruments are to them. Maybe because of yet we've not had to use them that much with our own governments, although I did use them with the UK government, with a particularly punitive government, used the CRC because we had a very negative report in the UK. So we use these. They are very important in the Global South. Between 179 to 189 countries are signed up to all these actions and standards. Let's not forget that. That is an immense amount of work. That is decades of work, and it's a great legacy for us. Without global agreements, movements on the ground are bereft of partners in the struggle for rights within hostile political and social contexts in their countries and regions. So FFP allies and progressive governments must not give up the fight. And let me just finish by saying there's a lot of really great action. There's leadership from progressive governments. Mexico in the room, talking about constitutional change. That's what we want to see. Constitutional change is the hardest thing to change. Ireland also has made important constitutional changes. Many of us have, well, some of us have no constitutions, but where you have a constitution, That's where you want to see the change happening. It's brilliant. Chile, for example, on issues of care, climate, women's economic rights. They're also looking at gender chapters and trade agreements. 2 days ago, the Australian government published its international gender equality strategy. A big shout out for them. I must say it's recommended reading. Very relevant to what I've just said. This is from their strategy, their new strategy. Gender equality is central to our interests. It's not just a women's issue, nor is it something we pursue simply as a matter of fairness or justice, though it's both fair and just. It's about accelerating progress for everyone. These signs are really, really important, I think, especially at the moment for all actors on gender equality. So we need to preserve resource flows to uphold civil society. We need to exercise a voice of resistance on the global stage when powerful countries undermine the value of multilateral institutions. The non-spoiling we've seen in multilateral agreements will continue. Responses must be robust. The EU has a very important role to play here. In relation to this, the committed state parties need to quickly form networks of resistance to secure their position in negotiations at the multilateral level. We have to continue to push for gender and inclusion in high-level policy instruments. And I did hear, I think, well, I was told that this was the case, but I haven't officially heard it. For example, that Brazil and the UK have signed up to FFP+, I heard. I don't know if it's officially been announced, but there was a rumor that was, well, it wasn't a rumor, somebody from the FFP group told me that. That would be fantastic. It's a really important sign for us. I was also at a meeting this week with our development minister in the UK where she reaffirmed, and we need reaffirmation, she reaffirmed the UK commitment to sexual and reproductive health rights, including abortion. These signals from government matter. They matter for us all. So fundamentally, any funding for feminist action anywhere is valuable, and wherever we all work, there is great work to do. There's too much to say. Please look at our publications. We've got reports on non-spoiling, on what to do with feminist foreign policy, on secularism, democracy and feminism. That will be coming out on Monday. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I think this one. Thank you. Thank you very much. Applause not for everybody, but also thank you to remind us really that there are strategies that work. I think some are in the honeymoon, and we definitely hope it will remain and it will inspire others. Others have been at better stages. I'm not precisely looking at the EU or institutions, but we know member states. You cited a lot. You didn't cite Belgium when we're seated, but also cutting on ODA, right? Also less women in government and yesterday literally saying, I mean, I was still a bit shocked, although that whether it's women or men, I don't care, you know, so it's not very far from us at all. I think it's too rich to say something now, but I want to ensure some interaction. Now we had 3 interventions. We had ensured or at least secured from the floor. So I think I will, or at least I'll need some help to go around and maybe ask Alexandra Rosen from Concord, okay, for a short intervention from the floor. I'll give you 1 minute because otherwise we won't have too much dialogue. I'm looking at the time. We're supposed to, yeah. So I'll give.
Okay, I'll try to be fast.
Thank
then.
you.
So hello everyone. So I'm Alexandra. I'm working with Concord Europe, which is the NGO, European NGO Confederation of NGOs working on sustainable development and international cooperation. And I'm coordinating the work with our members on gender equality there. And we've been following the gap for a very long time now. And thank you very much for this very interesting discussion, and thank you for putting it also into the geopolitical context. I think it's impossible to talk about this without doing exactly that, and it feels sometimes that it's getting worse day by day. But in terms of answering the question from Concord's side on what the expectations, so the title of this conversation, the expectations of the EU for gender equality, I think we do have quite a few, and they're still in the making. But just to mention a few things, like again coming back to the geopolitical context, we see this really as an opportunity for the EU to step up politically. We heard this, and that's very reassuring. But to maintain this strong commitment to gender equality and to remain a champion for gender equality when others are retracting. We also think that we do have the tools and the policies available. GAP3, heard about it. It's a very, very good start. It's an ambitious agenda that we can continue from. From our side, we really like to see the EU remaining principled around human rights and the GAP3 principles, the human rights-based approach, the gender transformative approach, and the intersectionality principles. Again, maybe working on improving the implementation there. But also there's a time to increase the focus on gender-specific interventions and not to shy away from that, and specifically not shying away from SRHR. Also, a few last points. It's around what we heard on funding. So there's a key process, MFF, coming up to ensure coherence between MFF and the GAP. So we'd really like also to see that 85% of ODA goes to Gender 1. We've said this for a long time as Concord, to G1 actions, and 20% of ODA going to G2 actions. So not share of projects, but share of ODA. It's an important distinction there.
I think we'll, sorry to...
And the last one is just on the
okay,
meaningful engagement with women's rights organization to really ensure that that remains a key component of the engagement and the commitment to gender equality. And also funding, reiterating the point on funding to really increase. And I think the EU is even at 0.5%, and we can really do better. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll move to the next intervention. Maria Groenewald from Voice EU. That's you. Okay, so I'll be sharp on 1 minute. If I understand, women in humanitarian action, which is indeed a topic we haven't really mentioned yet, and which is very, very relevant to today's context.
Thank you. Thanks for the interesting intervention. Is it working? Yes, right. And thanks for inviting me. I'm Maria Groenewald. I'm the director of Voice. Voice is a leading network of humanitarian NGOs here in Brussels with 90 members implementing principled humanitarian action worldwide. And a year ago, we have published Voice Out Loud, our members magazine, on the topic of women's role in humanitarian action. And so I would like to highlight a little bit also this aspect in the discussion. So, for example, one of our members, CARE, was pointing out the importance of involving and integrating women from the start of any humanitarian intervention, and thinking gender really from the start of any humanitarian programming, because women are overwhelmingly the first responders in any crisis or emergency, but women's voices are the least heard in programming and in implementing. And this is something that we, together with our members, would also like to change, actually. Mercy Corps, another of our members, were saying that leaving women behind has a negative impact on the resilience of their entire communities. Meaning what all these articles and all these examples from projects are showing is that from the planning to the recovery to the next phase, women's participation is really crucial. And this is something that really also has to be recognized by donors. So it's also important to think about donors in the EU to keep on also financing humanitarian interventions that keep this aspect of gender and women's involvement on their radar, knowing that the political landscape is not going into that direction at the moment. I keep it short. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I think indeed, I really don't want to reduce, and that makes me think that for one of the next one, we may introvert also and hear from the rich experiences of the different NGO caucuses that are working here to build. I'm sure you're all very networked. I just arrived, so I'm less, but it will be much needed. And I think similarly, of course, we're not comparing and we're not there yet, and we will not get there. But in the US, what you see, of course, a lot as well is finding other entry points to Congress people, justice, and I think one of the things, at least at the UN, that we're tasked to do in emergency as well, is find those stories, that data that will say, like you said, so many maternal deaths will increase in Afghanistan by then, right? So with that, I pass to one more intervention from the floor before opening, Laetitia Thyssen. All right, Laetitia. Senior Policy Analyst at the Feminist Foreign Policy Progressive Voices Collective.
Yes, thank you very much, and hi everyone. Thanks a lot also to UN Women and ODI for this extremely timely and relevant event. Some of my points are slightly overlapping with what has been already said, but perhaps that's also the good news in the sense that we all agree on what is needed. So today, in particular, I wanted to also to raise attention to the Feminist Foreign Policy Progressive Voices Collective that I'm here today to represent, which was launched in 2023 by FEPS, the Foundation for European Progressive Studies, and the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung. It is composed of around 60 feminist experts, civil society organizations, and policy activists from all continents who are working together to advance a transformative and intersectional feminist approach to foreign policy. Its idea was to push for a feminist foreign policy agenda in EU debates that goes beyond rhetoric and ensures meaningful action through expert meetings, publications, and public conferences. And I highly encourage you to look up our publications, which are all available on our website. But with the collective especially, I wanted to insist on one of the elements that was underlined multiple times, and that is the issue of resources as one of the 4 R's in the FFP frameworks, besides representation, rights, and reality. Indeed, despite the member states' commitment to FFP, the financial allocation remained critically low. Only 2% of the EU budget is assigned to programs with gender equality as a primary goal. And as Caroline already mentioned as well, and that's something that we highlight very much as part of our work, less than 1% of ODI is specifically encouraging and supporting women's rights organizations. And so what I would like to put also to the panelists here as a point of reflection is also how we can ensure that FFP is not sidelined, but embedded as a core funding priority, particularly as we are going through a very gloomy environment with a severe backlash on women's rights, and what concrete mechanisms should be introduced in order to guarantee a substantial increase in direct, long-term, and flexible funding for feminist movement. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Long. And I think I'm looking at the time, but I don't want to go over time, but I want to give it, I'll be authoritarian on that one, 3 interventions, 3 questions, so that we have somewhat of a dialogue. Then I will hand over to you for really 1 minute, not response really, but opening, and then we can still continue the conversation during the break drinks. So if there's none, but I'm sure there's a lot. Mary.
Thank you very much, Mary Collins from the European Women's Lobby. Thank you so much. I think you've echoed everything that we feel and that we see and we experience. And first of all, we're really looking forward to the roadmap. We believe that a high-level political statement from the EU is absolutely crucial in this world in turmoil, and it's really important that the EU is very strong on this. So we really look forward to that. And also to the forthcoming consultation on the gender equality strategy. Just to say we share many of the priorities that have already been outlined by Ega. So we look forward to working together as well on that. Just to say for the roadmap, we hope that the EU will reaffirm its commitment to Beijing. It's really important, 30 years later, that this is said one more time. So I just want to come back to the issue of money, because probably the biggest taboo, but we need to talk about money. We need to follow the money, and the funding programs and what's happening in the world for the moment is extremely concerning, but it's not only happening outside of the EU. We know that the boat is being shook as well on choppy waters in the EU. And we're very concerned that many of statements that are coming out recently are about checking NGOs, civil society organizations at European level. So we need to watch this space and we need to work together very strongly. I have one proposal, and that's we have an opportunity so that we can walk the talk and practice what we preach. We have the forthcoming multi-annual financial framework, which has already been mentioned. So I think we need to ensure that gender mainstreaming / gender budgeting is part of the general regulation. That would mean it would be applicable to all of the programs, including the agricultural policy and everything else. So I think that's what we need to strive for, so that we can ensure that everything, all of our money is being looked at through a gender lens. I just want to point out as well that in 2021, the European Court of Auditors did a report on gender mainstreaming the EU budget. And it shows very clearly that it's not been done and hasn't been done. And it has a list of recommendations. I think we should really support moving ahead in that. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll take another one on this side.
Thank you. Fionn from DSW, we're a global health NGO where I head up the work on women's health. Equally, like many participants here, very much looking forward to the roadmap and the gender equality strategy. But I think we also need to look at all of the other things that are going on from a policy point of view to really move the needle on this issue, both within and outside of the EU. And so, you know, we are hearing references to competitiveness every other sentence and looking at the compass. I do feel like it's missed opportunity there in terms of gender equality. It would be really keen to hear from you with the push that's being done internally to ensure that the life sciences strategy, for example, will deliver on women's health. The AI Act will deliver on gender equality, on women's health, etc. We'd be keen to hear from you if those efforts are underway within the Commission and how you expect that the compass can deliver. And of course, not just for women inside of the EU, but for women globally. We're missing tools for postpartum hemorrhage. We've got a dearth of contraceptive options for women and men across the world. And so in this era of constrained fiscal environments, how can we ensure that the different policies and programs of the EU can really drive forward gender equality for everyone everywhere?
Thank you very much. I'll go to the back of the room. First up.
Yeah, I'm actually here with my colleague Alessandra, so speaking for both of us. My name is Merte Bovenaert. I work for Oxfam Novib, which is the Dutch branch of Oxfam. I maybe wanted to point out a bit the elephant in the room. We were discussing geopolitical contexts, and I think it's very important to discuss the US aid suspension has been imposed that will leave millions of people across the globe without humanitarian aid. And I really feel that now is the time to come together as the EU to pressure governmental leaders or politicians to really step in and close this funding gap. Because if we don't, simply, it will not happen. So I feel like, yes, we can discuss the MFF and the future, and that's all very important. But what can we do at this moment to come together as a feminist movement, as feminist organizations here today, to really engage that discussion? Because from where I'm standing, like, I don't really see discussion on EU level at the moment. I think it's awkwardly silent. So I really urge you today, let's come together. Let's make sure that we talk about this urgent need, because really thousands of people are going to die if we don't come together and fill that funding gap.
Thank you. And I think that, not to ignore the virtual questions, but I think that links to at least the first one, which was precisely that question about, I mean, was more clearly about USA, but as some are de-investing ODA or the gender sphere, of course, the question and the other question links to it is one, of course, more on the financial side, because as Mary said, I think at the end of the day, some things cost. What are the discussions at EU level? Are there any discussions to pull in? I mean, it's a huge gap. I would even say not just the EU. I mean, you know, it's because of course we look at that for leadership, but leadership is multilateral now. So I don't want to put Mexico on the grill. I mean, we have nobody from China or others, but still. And I think the other questions were already roughly mentioned. So now, before I think we break, I will give you all 1 minute maybe for a last reflection, comment, or response if there's something burning. I will start with Kathleen online. 1 minute.
Yes, thank you so much. And let me reflect briefly on the questions that were raised about gender budgeting and gender mainstreaming. Maybe a bit of information from my side that for the next EU budget, 2028-2034, AIGE is providing technical support to DG Budget and the European Parliament in the design and implementation of a methodology that meets international standards to advance gender equality. So I'm really happy that we have been asked to support both. And then on gender mainstreaming, we plan to open a help desk on gender mainstreaming in 2026 in order to support the member states and also European Union with all the instruments we have developed. We have a whole range of gender mainstreaming instruments that you can find on our website, and we get questions about how to practically implement gender mainstreaming, and that's why we also decided to open a help desk on gender mainstreaming in 2026. A brief reflection from my side, Florence. Again, thank you so much for inviting me. And I mean, it's very clear, and we keep saying that a lot remains to be done, especially now in extremely challenging times. So thank you.
Thank you, Julia.
Yes, I'm happy to not be the last one because I'm going to do something which I normally don't like doing. I'm actually always saying also to my colleagues, we have to actually keep focused on what works and see what we can actually do to stay course, which we will. But I wanted to actually bring, and these last comments now go into this direction, a little bit of sobering realism, I think, in this debate, because I frankly do not think that the old strategies will continue to work. And there are several aspects. One is the whole funding, and I will also leave it to Chiara, but simply looking at figures, and I'm not good with figures, so I don't have exact figures, but looking at the sheer amount of money which goes to anti-rights movements globally already now, compared to support for women's and other equality rights organizations, already we're actually very, very much on the backseat, and we will not, I mean, looking at sheer numbers, I don't see where the money should come from. And in relation to that, nobody here this afternoon mentioned security or defense, which I think is another debate we have to have in this context, because this is where a lot of it actually goes and will continue to go. And the second point, so one is funding, the other one is international institutions and multilateral fora here as well. Yes, this has worked and this has been very important, but if we are looking at developments there, we will face very hard times to even keep up, I think, what we have achieved, and not speaking about advancing our objectives here. So in both of them, or overall and beyond, I think what we need to do is I keep saying we need to work harder, we need to think harder, we need to think out of the box, and we need to do things we haven't done yet and we don't like doing. As I said, I mean, one is we will, I think, have to engage with partners and with inconvenient partners to build new alliances, on very topical alliances with partners who are not normally aligned with us. And another one we are looking at right now is, I think we need to engage, and here I'm with you, legal action is very important. We need to engage with parliamentarians around the world much more, and actually try to engage also much more with rights movements and to really topically build alliances, geographically build alliances, and try to push things on a much smaller scale forward, I fear, than what we've done or what we've achieved over the last years. So I hand this over. I hope for some more uplifting words in the end, maybe not from you, Chiara, but overall. But I really think we need to, in the interest of our common objective and our common interest, we need to be realistic here, and things are not going to be as rosy as they've been.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. I'm not sure I will be uplifting. On the last question around the USA and what is happening in front of our eyes in the last few days. As yourselves, we are observing, we are analyzing, we are collecting the intelligence around the impact that this is having. And I mean, actually, there are, every day the situation evolves. In the sense that, there is there was a succession of executive orders and each and every of them has implications. So I think the first thing to be done in crisis is stay calm and analyze what is going on. So of course, all the information that your organization are collecting are extremely important. Second point is mitigate expectations. The EU, with the current budget, will never be able to replace or make it up for this tremendous funding gap that we see accelerating, but particularly in the last few days. So let's face it. I mean, our budget is transparent, and you can give us that, so you know what we are talking about. This is nowhere near the cuts and the impact of the cuts of the last few days. So short term, I think it's really about also seeing once again with like-minded as Team Europe but beyond. Is there a need for reorientation? And also see what what can be done in the short term, but there is no magic wand. There is no money growing under the carpet. So that's the situation. Huh? And this is a big issue in the gender equality sector, but it's not the only one. Let's not forget. I mean, the whole health sector is. And I had the same discussion this morning around human rights, around the democracy support. So it's very huge. So we are analyzing. Happy to hear to receive also your own analysis and impact. And I know it's painful. It's painful, particularly for local organizations, notably in the global south, who are closing. People get fired. People are closing their offices, and it will be very, very, very difficult to reopen that. But so I think the call for all of us to really talk together and take action is important. Now, on the future and the perspectives, union budget, alongside EGA in DG INPA, I throw you this news, is also supporting DG Badge because we have had a gender tracking system for a while. As you know, we follow the OECD gender marker. So we have been working with our budgetary colleagues that are working on precisely following up on this ECA audit to introduce a gender tracking throughout the union budget. And I think, there was a question, how can we do to monitor, tracking, having markers, having tracking systems embedded in the regulations, that's a very good first entry point. And you mentioned that one. On the MFF, I don't expect that the volume of the funds that we will get for the next period, 2028-2034, will actually increase. Maybe I'm not an optimistic person, but given the tendency in our member states and given that our member states in the Council and the European Parliament are the budgetary authority, and all the pressing priorities within the EU, I'm not sure that, we can consider that, the volume will increase, but we will do all we can, all it's in our power to really make the case for the need, the urgent need to exercise this leadership, to strengthen our partnerships internationally, and really to keep the external actions of the EU a priority within these discussions. And of course, you also play your part there.
But I was gonna say, indeed, we have always looked at the EU and EU member states as allies, but let's not underestimate some of the divisions or some of the pushbacks as well inside, where we need to stand ready to support as well. So I was going to say to those of you who write letters, petitions, I mean, I think it's also the time to support all our allies or the gender allies within the EU. It's not, of course, the Trump administration, but I think certainly. No, but I think you were realistic, and I think it's good for people to know and to hear. I'm taking it one step further. We know on the financial issue, we all have seen the mission letters with the main priority on competitiveness and security. I think that's crystal clear. And I mean, as much as you may want or you may think, I mean, there's a harsh reality, which we may not necessarily think it's the right option, but that's the direction that has been taken. So I think it is indeed the time to us to have these open conversations, but it also, like you just said, the time for each of us to play a role as also support, ally, and try to precisely get a high-level political commitment on budget or on gender policies from different forms. I'll hand over to you because I want to keep the Mexican uplifting spirit. I'm sorry.
Oh, am I not going to be uplifting? Okay. Well, I'll start not uplifting. I mean, to be honest, on USAID, it's irreplaceable. Okay, so we're talking 16 billion on humanitarian aid. The next biggest donor, I think, is Germany at 2. UK at 2, Japan at 1.8. So this is irreplaceable. If it's the full 40 billion, we are looking at a sector undergoing significant change. But we need to control this virus, and we need to continue to advance at the moment without the USA. Remember that there are many, many brilliant people in the States, and we need to reach out and we need to support them with our feminist networks. They are some of the best feminists I've ever worked with. And, you know, they must be in a terrible state right now, and I know they are. So we need to support them as allies. I think it is a political opportunity right now for countries or for blocs to stand up and be a strong voice on gender equality and on equality per se. It's, you know, who's going to do that? Who's going to stand up? Obviously, the EU is still a strong ally, but could they be more of an ally? The signalling does need to come with some money, or with what is left of the money, a larger proportion for feminist movements. So the message is, if the EU values democracy, fund feminist movements. And if we want to see equality to drive growth in global well-being and peace and security, we need to get behind the current multilateral agreements, and we need to block norm spoiling. And finally, I would say it is probably quite a dangerous time. You know, I'm not a geopolitical analyst, but it feels like that. But we must remember that, you know, in the 1960s, we got behind the civil rights movements. Those were dangerous times as well. And we actually made quite a lot of progress around labor movements as well at that time. In the 80s and 90s, we focused actually on what was called political correctness, and that was a positive term when it came in. It was occupied by the right, and they made it a negative term, but it pushed us to change attitudes in society and to recognize implicit bias and continue reforms in equality. And in 2000s, the term woke emerged from the left again. That came in as a positive term. It was weaponized by the right, and they made it a negative term. But we were focusing on systemic and structural inequalities, and we have made progress. So there will always be backlash. But feminists will not bow down to bullies. And we just have to hope that this fever, whilst it's infectious, will pass.
Thank you. That was a more uplifting one, and I was also gonna add, because I know we've got some courageous ones also that have been through some dismantling of gender architecture. I'm thinking about EU member states not looking particularly, and that are now some of the best leaders or champions. We've seen it in Brazil, so it's not. It's not for forever, but I think thinking of multilateralism, thinking of CSW Beijing +30 that's coming up as the UN at least, and as UN Women, we expect no less than the acquis we have. I don't have a crystal ball, but I think we've done all we could. I think maybe because it's not one topic or another, and it's a political declaration from the Secretary General, we may be shielded for any backlash. I'm not sure we will be able to get any marvelous topics on board, except probably climate, AI, and others. But at least we will reiterate the framework. And I think that's what all regions, including the Europe group, are doing as well in terms of the regional reports and the conclusions. But this is to say that I remember that the last CSWs were saved by countries like Namibia, Jordan, or others already. It wasn't necessarily Europe or European member states. So we do have allies. I don't want to minimize, but we do have allies otherwise, in other places. And that's not about the financing part, that's about political commitment. And that's how I want to turn to Mexico with all the responsibility that implies.
Thank you. That's a big burden on his shoulders on a Thursday afternoon, but thank you very much. No, I must say that I've been working on as a Mexican diplomat for around 20 years, and I've been working mostly in international organizations dealing with development and a lot in the UN framework. And I as a Mexican diplomat, I cannot refer to the decision of any country on how to deal with its budget or its internal structures. But allow me to say this: if anybody thinks that a country can develop on its own without an environment around that is also conducive to development, I believe it is a mistake. I don't think anybody can. I think that in order to ensure development of one in any particular country, you need to make sure that you have a inclusive growth all around. In Mexico, we call it the Mexican humanism, and that is, for instance, how we have been dealing with migration for the last 6 years, trying to promote that communities that are producing migrants have sustainable economies that allow people to stay in a safe environment and to make migration a choice, not an obligation. And we have been working on that very seriously. We have offered to other partners to work in that line. We hope that we are going to be able to advance in that direction. But I think that there is basically no alternative to multilateralism. And I think that the acquis that we have achieved in the frame of the UN framework, both the Beijing platform, but also the Belém do Pará, the Istanbul Convention, I think that those are acquis that give a floor, and I think that you can count on Mexico to stand that ground. And I think that you can count on Mexico to really not go back on any of those achievements. And I think that one of these elements that was that was a recommendation in the ministerial meeting on feminist foreign policy was exactly that, to defend what is going on the international organizations, and also to support women's movement around the world. So I think that I cannot promise 40 billion.
No,
I cannot promise that, but what I can promise is that you have us at your side to continue advocating for this very important central issue, and to continue building for a more just and inclusive future. Thank you.
thank you. in current times, and I think the more leadership, outspoken leadership we have, and the more alliances among like-minded countries, the better. With that, I'll hand over to Dora to just say a few thank you words, and we'll be able to network and continue conversation.
Well, just to say a huge thank you to everyone. I'm going to be very short because I know we've slightly overrun. A huge thank you to our wonderful panelists, including Carly-Anne online. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. And thank you to all of you in the room. Thank you to Sophie, Saskia and Florence in UN Women, and to ODI Europe colleagues, including Yusuf here and Aline, who has done so much work but couldn't be with us today. And thank you to the technical team here. We will be in touch with the next edition of the Gender Talks, which will be happening in a couple of months. We're still discussing the title and the topic that we will focus on, possibly something on the MFF, but we shall see. Thank you so much, everyone, and speak soon.